Hey all, I'm back in the studio this week and I'm going to show you how to make a pair of earrings using sterling silver. To start this pair of earrings, I'm going to be working with 14 gauge sterling silver wire, and my first step is going to be making my initial loop that's going to be for the earring. So whenever I'm working in sterling silver, I try to make a little mock-up of the size of the ring that I want to use for the earring, the shape, the gauge, or the thickness of the wire in brass or copper, something cheap, so I'm not just cutting a piece of sterling and then realizing maybe it's not what I want to use. So I know that this one, it's a piece of wire cut to 3 inches, so I'm going to cut this guy to 3 inches. I have one end filed flat, and now I'm going to measure 3 inches on my piece of wire, make a mark, and then I'm going to cut this with my tube jig. Using my parallel pliers, I'm going to shape both of these pieces of wire so that both ends meet up together, because the next step is going to be soldering these guys together. In order to solder these two jump rings together, I'm going to start with my hard solder so that has the full square on the end. I'm going to cut a whole bunch of little chips first. And I'm going to take my flux, which is going to keep our seam clean while we're soldering, and just paint a little bit on each seam and set my little pieces of solder right on those seams. And then I'm going to light my torch and start going. All my jump rings that I just soldered together are in the pickle pot getting all cleaned up. I'm going to work on top of this charcoal block to make little silver balls that I'm going to use as a little decorative element on my earrings. So what I'm going to do to make these guys turn into little round silver balls is I'm just going to heat them up with my soldering torch, and they're just going to ball up right up. So our jump rings are all out of the pickle, and they're all cleaned up and ready to be shaped and formed. So I'm going to first pop them on my round mandrel before I turn them into the oval shape that I want. So I'm going to hit them with a rawhide hammer. So I have my little model that I made before, so I want to try to get my jump rings to be about that same shape. So I start just by hitting them on their side to get them a little closer to the oval shape to begin with. And then I have these great handy tools called step pliers. So it'll give me a uniform curve on either side. So I'm going to use the smallest step on these little pliers here. Pretty close, I just have little curves right there. What I'm gonna do next is hammer texture my ovals that I've made right here. I'm gonna be using a little radial hammer. So this is a really nice heavy hammer that usually you'd use for forging, so stretching your metal, but I'm just gonna use it so I can have a nice little striping throughout this shape here. Using my medium solder, I am going to pre-flow little areas where solder is going to be on these rings here, because that's where I'm going to put those little silver balls that I made earlier. Now for the second one. My earrings that I soldered on my little decorative little sterling silver or fine silver balls on are all cleaned up, and they are ready for the next step. So I am going to be soldering these little jump rings right to the tops here. Those guys are all ready to be soldered, and while I have my torch on, I'm also going to make my ear wires. The gauge wire that you always want to use for ear wires is 20 gauge. I am going to cut it into a 2-inch piece. And I am going to ball up the ends of the ear wires, and then it kind of matches the design down below. That makes them look a little bit more finished. Both of these guys will be up here on my solder board, a little flux on the seams of those jump rings. And I'm going to be using my easy solder, so it has a 1 bend in it, to close those jump rings. Alright, so those two are all set, so I'm going to let them cool and then I'll pickle those. I'll work on my 2 earring wires for now. So what I'm going to do is, using my interlocking tweezers, I'm going to hold these up to the torch and the end of this wire is going to ball up. Both my earrings and my ear wires are out of the pickle, so now I am going to stretch my jump rings on the top of these into an oval so it matches the design. And then I'm going to shape my ear wires. So I'm going to start by hitting the ends with just the file just a little bit to get any sharpness off, because that's going to be the part that's going to go through your ear. So I'm going to use my chain nose pliers and just curl up this part of the ear wire just a little. That's going to be what's going to hook into my earring. Then I'm going to shape the whole earring. So I'm just about ready to do my final assembly of these earrings. I'm going to add an additional tiny jump ring right to my soldered loop that I put on top of the earring, so that they hang straight when you're wearing them. So these guys are all together now, and they're all ready to go in our tumbler to get polished up. So they're all finished and polished, and here is the final product. Pretty fun. Thanks for watching.